Everyone, I am commencing the March 16th meeting of the Arlington Finance Committee. We have with us representatives from the school department, and we will have introductions in a few minutes. I first want to lay the ground work or the ground rules for what we're going to be doing tonight. We are going to turn this over to the school department, and we will spend as much time as we need on this very important budget. And then after that has been concluded, we will revisit the capital planning budget. And whatever time we have left, we'll deal with other business. So that is the itinerary for tonight. And with that, Josh, would you like to make opening remarks about this budget and who is with us today?
Sure. So Peggy, Dean, and I are responsible for this budget. As you all know, it's a significant portion of our overall spending. About $107 million, I believe, is our proposed if the override passes. As we look at all the budgets, and I think that the town manager said that on average salaries are going up by 6% across the board. The same thing happens in the schools, and so it's a very large number to kind of look at and say, oh, well, geez, why are they spending so much money? I think they'll explain why they're spending so much money to us tonight, but I just want to point out that we've gone through a long process. They'll also describe it in their subcommittee meetings, and they've really gone through a huge effort this year because of the override implications. And again, I'm a little defensive about our school budget, but when the town is cutting, I think, 0.98 FTEs or something of that sort, if the override passes, the potential 16.8 FTEs would be moved. If it doesn't pass, it's 68, something like that. And so, unlike, I think, a lot of the other town budgets, which are, kind of business as usual in the sense you kind of make small adjustments, the school department is constantly kind of reevaluating what their needs are, what their enrollment is. They can't have a classroom and not have a teacher in it, so they can't kind of bring along a vacancy forever. So it's a very, very complicated thing, and I really give a lot of credit to our administration and the school committee for kind of bringing us to where we are tonight. They'll do a much better job than we can do in terms of presenting it, but I just want to kind of frame it that it's a very, very dynamic thing and a very challenging budget to manage, and I hope you'll support it at the end of the night.
Well, I make introductions, Josh.
I'll be happy to make introductions. Dr. Holman, sitting next to our moderator. And then this is someone you haven't met, Chris Schweitzer, who's the new CFO of the school department. So he's kind of been here since the fall. So as I said, it's a very dynamic budget that they've had to work on. And we all know that when you inherit somebody else's budget, things don't always align just the way you want them to. So and plus the override. Jeff Thielman, who's the chair of the school committee. He's kind of new here, I think, but Laura Gittelson's from on the budget subcommittee in the school committee. Percy and Dr. Amphrey is also on the school committee and the chair of the budget subcommittee. And Rob is HR. So he's the one who's kind of responsible. And I guess I'll also frame it in all these presentations that we participate in. It's a very sensitive thing when you're talking about changing around people's roles and number of people, et cetera. And the school has kind of pushed their efforts forward to try and get their staff as much time in terms of meeting the override, what's going to happen, yes or no. So again, I apologize for the fact that we're kind of giving you this stuff a little bit late, but I've been very impressed with how much material we've gotten and the detail that we've gotten about the override scenarios.
And with
Thank
that, I will turn it over to the superintendent for the presentation.
Thank you, Chair Deschler, and Mr. Lovell, and everybody. Good to see you. My name is Liz Homan. I'm the superintendent of schools in Arlington. I'm going to get us kicked off, and then I will be handing it over to Mr. Schweitzer to start with an overview. You can go to the next slide. I will be trying to remember to cue you on slides, but if I fail, please just ask me where we are.
Okay.
So we are going to go through a little bit of framing first, then we'll do an overview with you of the two scenarios that we plan for this year that are in the book. So it's one book, it's two budgets. They're fully built out, sort of on the back end, and we can look at the data if there are specific questions about specific objects or lines or accounts. Then we'll go over a little bit of a enrollment overview and federal funding update. We'll talk about the budget changes in the scenario A, the yes override budget, and in scenario B, if the override were to not pass. And we have a little bit of additional information that's based on questions that we received that Mr. Lovell passed along to us in an attempt to try to address any questions that folks have as part of the larger presentation, knowing that we'll have a longer discussion afterwards. So I'd like to kick off by starting, and you can, yep, you're on the right one, by starting where I left off with the school committee last week before they adopted the budget proposal that you have this evening. So officially, this is now the school committee's budget proposal. Even though we're going to present it tonight, they may weigh in with input because we've had a lot of discussion, as Mr. Lovell indicated. This fall, I wanted to tell a little bit about some of what we've been up to this year, though. This fall, the Commissioner of the State Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, who happens to be a new Arlington parent this year, moved from Chicago, and decided to hang out in Arlington with us. He gave me a call and asked me whether we would be willing to host a celebration for schools and districts whose accountability outcomes exceeded pre-pandemic levels. And he said that he was asking us, not because he lives here, not because it's convenient and down the street, but because we were among the districts whose outcomes improved for both math and ELA back to pre-pandemic outcomes, and our outcomes in particular stood out. Maybe because we are the largest district for whom that was true, first, like the biggest district in the state this year to hit and exceed pre-pandemic performance. Perhaps it was because we showed significant gains for students with IEPs and low-income families and started to actually close the achievement gap. Not sure. But he asked if we would host, so we did. And the two graphs on this slide show the percent of students who met or exceeded standards in ELA and math in Arlington Public Schools. We are the red star on the chart up towards the top. So, towards the top is better. More students meeting or exceeding standards. The other districts listed are districts that in 2024, the state had designated as similar to Arlington demographically or based on wealth profile. So these are like districts according to the state as of 2024. A number of them are in the town manager 12. I want to point out that Arlington's position is in the top 3 or 4 in both math and ELA. And some of the pictures here show the work we're doing that we think contributes to that. Family and community events are celebrating our diversity in the schools. We have mock Congress happening in 8th grade civics so that the kids are ready to sit on finance committee when they're all grown up. We have new curricula that's aligned with research on how kids learn to read. We have excellent programs and extracurriculars that students are able to engage in order to further their learning. The next slide compares Arlington to those same districts, but this time it highlights per pupil expenditure. The districts in green spend more per pupil than Arlington. Districts in purple spend slightly less overall. And what I hope you can take away from the presentation tonight is that we do not waste resources in the Arlington Public Schools, and that with what we have, we are making great strides. We told the community in 2022 what we plan to do in a comprehensive 5-year strategic plan that incidentally cost the district very little to produce. We actually got a grant to help build it. Then we did the things in that plan, including improving competitive pay across our bargaining units and roles to ensure that we could hire the best and brightest for our kids. And then shortly after we began implementing the plan, frankly, a lot faster than I expected, it started to show results. Those results look like thriving kids. I won't hide that I'm proud of achievement on a state test, but honestly, when I say thriving, I'm not talking about tests. Our schools are full of kids who build lasting connections with peers, with their staff, with our staff, with content that we're teaching. And that programming is more accessible than it's ever been. So we're hoping to show you some evidence that that's the case throughout the discussion tonight. But I am a firm believer that if a school district is not seeing a shift in student outcomes, then they're not really doing much of anything. And I wanted to begin by pointing out that we are, in fact, doing much of lots of things. And that we're doing all of that, trying to judiciously use resources, understanding that we're in a situation where we need to work with our town colleagues to pull expenses down as much as we can while still meeting the regulatory expectations of the state. So this evening, we will be reviewing school finances at a high level, give you a summary of the two budget scenarios to start, and for that, I'll hand it off to Mr. Schweitzer.
Hi, everyone. We can go to slide 6. Chris Schweitzer, very happy to be here. Worked with some of you on long range, or been in those meetings, and worked on subcommittee and IT. Look forward to working with all of you in the future, and thank you for having me tonight. This slide that we have up in front of us is a summary slide that we've had since the beginning of our presentations back in February. We've had these this slide at the subcommittees, at the school committee meetings, as well as some of the public forums that we've held. This is kind of a one slide, one snapshot summary of the two budgets in which the school department worked on over the last several months. You'll see these icons here kind of in the upper section, that red B for the no on the override scenario, and then the A for the yes on the override scenario in the result of override passing or failing. You'll see these icons on the upper right-hand side of any slide that it's applicable to, as well as in your budget book. I'll reference some places you can look at that as well. But throughout the budget book or slides, or even if you look back at prior PowerPoints that we've had to school committee and in other public forums, you'll see those icons, so hopefully that helps kind of with the flow of reading any documents. And then for any of the charts or narrative that we present for scenario A, we subsequently will go in that same order for scenario B. If we can move on to the next slide. So again, as the superintendent said, just going to start very, very high level, a couple charts on both of the scenarios, and then we'll dive into some of the student enrollment information, other important data that's in context of the budget build, and then we'll dive deeper into both of those scenarios. So this slide you have here, you've seen this in the past. This has been within the historic budget books. You'll see on the right-hand side for FY27, the sum of the blue and the red are the town appropriation for the public schools as a percent of all of our other revenues contributing to the school's operations. The town appropriation in red is Chapter 70 funds from state aid, and then in blue is made up from the difference of local revenues from property taxes and other revenues within the town. The dollar and percent of our budget that has been contributed by grants and by revolving accounts does not keep up the pace with the operating budget and its needs. Up through FY25, you'll see here kind of within this bar chart and then in a subsequent chart, we still had some lingering ESSER funds and COVID relief money still through FY25, and those will maintain on these reports for a couple of years just to maintain that sense of consistency. Grants have been relatively flat. There just might be slight adjustments between all the entitlement grants up and down, a few bucks here and there based on allocation changes based on either our demographics or state or federal allocations. And then revolving accounts have been presented relatively level in the past couple of years. For FY27, all of the revolving accounts are presented in support of anticipated expenses directly offsetting operations for the school department. So I'll discuss those over the next couple of slides at a high level. So in your budget book on page 17 begins the funding summary charts for scenario A, and then the next page is scenario B. This is broken up on the two slides just for the presentation. So this chart here, the funding summary chart, presents our revenue sources from general funds, from circuit breaker entitlement grants, as well as the revolving accounts that directly offset school operations. So this report will still have some COVID money, as I said, but for the most part, it's focusing on those other aspects. For the grants, we do project that we'll receive the same amount of money flat next year, except you'll note here in Title I that there is a reduction in both scenarios, and the superintendent will speak to that on a subsequent slide. On the next slide, this is an initial snapshot of the bottom of that funding summary chart, again in your budget book. This in FY27 presents all direct offsets within those accounts anticipated for the operations of the school department. One thing I'd like to note here, we did get a question ahead of time about elsewhere in the budget book, but you'll see when I get to operational changes, there's a pretty significant operating budget decrease that is incurred for utility costs for both electric and gas. You'll see here that part of that is due to an increase in the building rentals revolving account of $250,000. The net of the other 400K or so from this 250 is just due to some of our green initiatives kind of coming to truth, both with the high school being fully built, operational. I've seen the images, probably 60% solar panels up there. Parking lot solar panels coming on, Bishop and Hardy solar panels coming on. So we're seeing at a base that our utilities are going to decrease, but then on the operating budget, there's also an additional offset into that building rentals. So I just kind of wanted to get ahead of that. And I'll speak into it, more detail when we get there. And then lastly on this chart is circuit breaker. And I do have a slide on this towards the end of the presentation where I'll go into more detail about what it is, how we get it, how do we use it. I just wanted to note it as it is on here, that we do use that to offset some of our out-of-district tuition expenditures. So I'll speak more about that at the end, but just wanted to note that is aspect of this funding summary chart. And then here, wrapping up the high-level scenario A, yes, on the override, I just wanted to share this just for kind of transparency and what is the actual budget. So when school committee votes for the superintendent's proposed budget and then it becomes the school committee's adopted budget, is that it's not just the bottom line, it's also cost centers or transfer categories within that. So for transparency's sake, I did just want to present this chart. I'll also present it in a couple slides for slide B, or for scenario B, and this can be found on page 23 of your budget book. So those individual transfer categories are kind of a check or a control measure on the department throughout the year, and we can only transfer money in between by a school committee vote. So now briefly, the next 4 slides, again, mirror the same format and methodology, but this is for scenario B and the result of a no override scenario. For scenario B, it is a level funded budget, so it's at $103.6 million as we are currently in FY26. In this scenario, the town appropriation percent of our total revenues goes down by about 1%, but you'll see, and we'll speak to a little bit deeper in a couple slides, that there is an increase in the revolving accounts, and this is due to the reintroduction of user fees for athletics as well as music. The next slide here, again, is for scenario B. This is on page 18 of your budget book. Same method and methodology as scenario A. The only difference is the level funded general fund, and there's no change on grants here. The next slide is scenario B. Again, this is the bottom revolving accounts. The only change here you'll see is a reintroduction of athletic user fees into the revolving account, and this would help offset some of our athletic coaching stipends as well as supplies for the various programs in sports, as well as the reintroduction of instrumental music fees, which would offset the cost for instrument teachers within the district. And then the rest of this chart is the same. And then to just wrap up this high level section before we turn over to the superintendent, and then again, we'll dive into each of the scenarios in more detail. This is just a summary of the no scenario, again, showing the level funded FY27 and then the adjustment of those various transfer categories.
Okay, so we talk about enrollments every time we come in to see you all. So we're going to talk about enrollment again a little bit more. Go to the next one. So this slide is the projection that we frequently share. We have some new projections. So the gray line sort of along the top is the McKibben projection that we had gotten, goodness, a long time ago now. It's been probably nearly a decade. And it used to be the case that you could see the pandemic on this chart, but we've sort of zoomed in on more modern day at this point, so you can't see that dip. But what is notable is that there was a dip in 2020 and 21, and that the school department, the actual line, which is the blue line, caught back up over a couple of years to what that projection had forecast. And we have always been the closest to that projection that we received from a vendor a while back. And we've run other projections. And what we are trying to figure out is why it doesn't feel as though our enrollment has tracked with those projections. So you see a gap on this particular chart, and that is intentional because for FY26, which is the year we're currently in, we have 6,161 students. But what was projected in our various projections, one from a vendor, which is the orange line from our partners at Sanborn, who we commissioned to do a new set of projections for us this past year, as well as the ones that we develop internally, which are really just a weighted formula that looks at past enrollments, that we're not on either of the marks for either of those two projections. Both of them had us lower. So we're consistently still having relatively level at this point projections or actual students coming in compared to the projections were higher than what was anticipated, because at this point birth rates had gone down and we were anticipating having lower enrollments. We do see a decline in elementary enrollment, and I'll talk to that in just a second. But it is noteworthy that we're over 100, we have over 100 more students than one of the projections, and no, about 60 actually, and then we have about 50 more students than one of the other projections. So they're not holding true yet, and we have a couple of theories as to why, because we've dug pretty deep into that to understand whether or not we can count on some reductions in the next few years. On the next slide, there is a chart that we've started to use to track elementary versus secondary. And there are a couple of different reasons why we keep a close eye on this one. First of all, when it comes to staffing, the resources need to move to where the kids are. And there are different licensure requirements for secondary than for elementary schools. So we need to know how to move those resources and when we will need to move them, which is why we carefully track where that transition mark has happened. In FY23, the number of secondary students in our schools exceeded the number of elementary students in our schools for the first time in quite a while. And ever since then, they've been on divergent paths, our little kids and our big kids, in terms of the numbers of them in our schools. What you'll notice is that that secondary line is a much steeper incline than we expected and than any of our projections told us we would have. And there are a few different reasons for that. The elementary decline is also less extreme than we would have expected, given the forecasts that we had several years ago and some of the projections that we received. So why is that the case? Couple different ideas about this. We've looked into our enrollment and who is joining the Arlington Public Schools over the past several years. We'll go to the next slide. And what we're seeing is that we have an increasing percentage of new enrollments that are showing that families are choosing APS over private school alternatives, switching basically from private settings to APS during some transitional opportunity, mostly at 6th grade, 9th grade, and 1st, 2nd grade is where we see the biggest bumps when we look at this by grade level. In the last couple of years, that margin with students joining us from a public school setting, maybe from another community or moving from out of state, has gone down, and the number of students joining us from private school settings has gone up markedly. This past year at 9th grade, probably a credit to the new high school, we saw a huge influx of students, and next year the brand new high school, which was built for 1,700 kids, will have 1,800 students in it. So it's booming and it has a lot going on, and we need to make sure that we have the resources there. So you'll also notice when we talk about what the changes are, that there are more reductions at the elementary level. We were very judicious about where those came from than there are at the secondary level, and that is because we simply cannot lose staffing at the secondary level with this many kids in the school. And the way that they will feel the strain of this is that they're not getting any new resources, which is what typically would have happened and has happened in the past when we've seen periods of significant enrollment growth. You can go to the next slide. Another reason why we have enrollments that are more stable, not declining as fast as we expected, has to do with the schooling choices likely of Arlington families. So over the past many years, we're sort of obligated to track and trace where kids are so that we know that everybody's getting school, because that's the law. So we have reports that tell us what percentage of families in Arlington with school-age kids are choosing which things with regards to their kids' education. So how many of them are choosing homeschooling? How many of them are choosing vocational education? How many of them are choosing private school? Since FY21, in FY21 we had about 85% of families choosing the Arlington Public Schools. That is up to almost 94% this school year. And over the past 2 years, that's been a 6% increase. So this is leveling off what we knew to be a decline in the birth rate and what should drive a decline in our overall enrollments. And some of this has to do with outcomes, with some of the things we've prioritized, with families having a positive experience, we think, but we haven't interviewed anybody, so I can't say for certain what is driving some of these decisions. I imagine as well that affordability is playing a role here. and that some families are finding they simply can't afford the private school tuition as much. And that tracks with some of the other data that we have about our population. So the next slide tells a little bit about some of the demographics of the APS population. We have had some shifting numbers with regards to some of our focal groups. Our focal groups are groups that we identified several years ago when we did our strategic planning who were experiencing significant achievement gaps compared to their peers. And so those categories include our English learners and former English learners, students from low-income households, students with disabilities, and students who identify as LGBTQIA+, which I can try to define if somebody needs it, but essentially students who don't identify necessarily along a gender spectrum or a identity spectrum that is heteronormative. And then there's also this high needs category. That's an aggregate category, high needs. And it captures students who are multilingual learners, students who are former English learners, students with IEPs, students who, there's one other one, I forget what it is. Low income, yes, thank you. So that population has increased over the past several years. Low income population has increased over the past several years. And so we have a more diverse student body that requires more with regards to services. We have more students who have IEPs now. We still do have needs from the pandemic that we're addressing. And so some of that drives some of the requirements with regards to staffing and spending for the public schools also. So on the next slide, I want to give a quick update on one of the funding streams that is intended to support students from low-income households. This is an update that we quite literally got last week. We had known the week before that there was going to be a significant cut to Title I funding in the state of Massachusetts. And then upon sort of digging into the resources associated with that announcement, found that there was a possibility that Arlington could be significantly impacted by this. So essentially what happened is that the federal government announced level funding, which is a cut to all federal title grants that schools benefit from all over the country. And so that includes Title I, which I'll talk about, Title II, which is tied to teacher professional development, Title III is for multilingual learners, English learners, and Title IV supports community engagement technology. And so the federal government said all of those will be level funded. Then they told the state that preliminary census data was revealing a 10% drop in Massachusetts' share of the national poverty total. So DESE told superintendents about a week and a half ago that they expect a significant decrease to the Title I award for FY27 for the state of Massachusetts of about $30 million. So despite the fact, and Massachusetts has a different qualification threshold for low income or economically disadvantaged than the nation does, but by Massachusetts standards and by national standards, because it's a similar measure, they just calculate it slightly differently. We have had a growing number of students who qualify for low income or Title I services. And we know that at least in part because the state qualified 5 of our schools last year. We had only qualified 2 when I started here. So we're spreading those resources now over more schools because those schools are qualifying because of the percent of students who are considered low income in those schools. But despite that, we may not be found Title I eligible next year because of what the state needed to do to reset its qualification criteria or what it needed to do to make the cut. We're still sort of digging in to try to understand exactly why we're in the warning zone. But what we were told is that if there was a warning label on the spreadsheet they gave us, that they suggested we develop one budget plan if we remain eligible and a separate plan for the possibility that we lose eligibility, which would be a loss of $163,000 in Title I funding for next school year. That has funded positions in the past. So you'll notice in the position schedule that there are no Title I dollars, no Title I staff members planned for next year. Should we get an allocation, that will go primarily towards the summer programming that we run for our students who qualify for those services. And it will go towards some like after school programming, hourly tutoring, if we're able to have the funds to support that. So that's the plan for right now. All right. Now I believe we're going to talk about the yes scenario.
Yep.
Are you started?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So scenario A, again, yes on the override. We're going to review a handful of slides here regarding just at a high level, kind of what are the changes within this budget. Then we're going to look at some of the operational changes, as well as the superintendent will dig deeper into some of the staffing changes. So personnel changes around restructuring of roles or reductions of roles and some efficiencies to balance the budget. If we can go to slide 23. So this, yes, override budget proposal overview. This has been shared over the last couple public meetings as well, in public forums and school committee meetings. This slide kind of helps communicate and put in, picture or a snapshot of, even in the yes scenario where there's a 4% revenue increase, a $4.1 million revenue increase in our budget, while there's still efficiencies and reductions and other things being discussed in this budget. Well, first and foremost, if we take just our salaries, level service, so the current staff we have, we step and COLA them, there's no other reductions or anything like that. That increase just for the staff is above and beyond that $4 million. So when we start looking at operational needs that are increasing also above 2, 3, 4%, some of which we'll detail here in a couple slides, and then you combine that with the significant salary increase as well, there needs to be a balance. So you'll see here in the next few slides that we meet an operational target number, and then there's some backed in efficiencies, reductions, and restructuring and staffing that balance the budget. So from feedback, if we can go to the next slide, this chart should look familiar from prior budget books and presentations. One change from feedback in a prior school committee meeting that we had was, again, to kind of speak to that, what is our baseline contractual need just carried forward to next year, and then how does that back into reductions? So this is for scenario A. You can see at the high level the $4.1 million increase for the $107.7 million budget. In that middle section of the change summary is where I speak to the budgeted contractual obligations for staff we have now in FY26 at 89 mil. And then next year, if that is level service without any changes to staff, and they're all stepped in COLA appropriately to COLA or contractual agreements, that's 93 mil. So that's that little over almost $4.2 million. At the bottom, you can see the operational increases, and I'll speak here shortly to that $1.9 million increase in operations. And so the net to balance our $4.1 million budget is there's reductions of about 1.8 in staffing. So I'll turn it over to the superintendent to kind of give you a little idea of some of the criteria in which we looked at reductions in staffing and creatively found solutions, and then go kind of slide by slide again in that change summary that's in your budget book on page 24 and 25, and then I'll speak to some of the operational changes.
So, Mr. Thielman said at school committee the other night that this has been a 6-month process, and I immediately thought in my head that I said to this committee last year that we would have to build 2 budgets for FY27. And so for me, it's been a year of thinking about this. And so we've known for a while that we were going to need to engage in this exercise. And so we started thinking about, okay, how do we do this in a way that feels right by kids? And so we have sought a lot of input from staff and community members, from the school committee, that would help us inform the reductions. And this is a short summary of the criteria that we've used and tried to keep front of mind when we're making determinations about what to reduce. So our plans were, as we started to look at our options, to stay strategic, make sure we stay focused on the strategic plan, try not to cut resources that were critical to that, to stay student-centered and try to minimize the impact of reductions on the student experience, knowing full well that we could not completely avoid cutting student-facing positions, and I'll speak to why in a little bit. We wanted to make sure that we stay strong, that we continue to see some of the outcomes that we're seeing, even if some of our available resources for that are not available, that we wanted to build a budget that we felt could be sustainable, that we knew that we could stay within that 4%, not need to ask for any additional dollars. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that we're maintaining the balance between staffing and operations. And that has been exceptionally difficult to do. We actually had goals we were trying to hit to pull the salary amount down further away from 85%, because that's where it sits right now. We weren't really able to in the yes scenario, but we were able to in the no scenario, and we'll talk about why. And then finally, we wanted to make sure we considered all our options, think outside the box, understanding that we will have to, if an override does not pass, think very creatively about our options, and that will cause some really significant, and I would argue, harmful changes to schools. We were really aiming for the least worst options that would distribute challenges across the system broadly. and I want to name that for every single one of these reductions, one of them might be sustainable, but not very strategic. One of them might be creative, but not very student-centered. So this was a holistic exercise, is what I'm trying to say. And it's not, we did this instead of that. It's not one for one. We really took as full of a picture as we could. Our administrators sat in hours and hours and hours of painful workshops with us, trying to understand what our staffing model adjustment options could be, so that the schools had what they needed and the students had what they needed. So let's talk about what is in here. So what I'm going to go through, and I am not going to go line by line or we'll be here all night, and I know none of you want that. So I'm not going to go line by line. I'm going to highlight a few things, but what I'm going through are the change summaries in the budget book, which were also sent along as separate documents. So that might be helpful to pull up while I speak through some of these. So we're going to start with the yes scenario. As Mr. Schweitzer said, there's $1.8 million in staffing reductions in this scenario. We started from, in an effort to sort of demonstrate that we were going to start far away from where the kids are and then sort of move in as we needed to so that we could continue to operate. We start with central office and district resources. We move down towards where there needs to be reductions to student-facing roles. So at central office, in no matter what happens scenarios, there is some leadership role consolidation. There is a reduction in information technology that I worked with the town manager and CIO on, which is an elimination of a deputy director of IT position. We have eliminated, we've consolidated a number of roles at central office. So for example, that second line and the third one as well, take what is currently 2 positions, one that oversees grants administration and all of our grant reporting expectations from the state, as well as helping us with competitive grants, identifying grants, et cetera, and our communications specialist who really does the day-to-day work of making sure our website's operable, that we're communicating effectively with families, that we're posting things when we need to, and it combines those roles. So in both of those cases, it's 2 positions down to 1, and we're trying to put functions together that make sense to put together. It's also notable on this slide that there are vacant positions that we're trying to highlight here, that we're trying not to backfill positions that are already vacant. We've put freezes on a lot of positions, and then those are the ones that were first for us to go to eliminate if they were not critical vacancies that we absolutely have to fill for a function that we can't operate without. And here I also just want to highlight there is a position in my office that is partially offset by Harvard, that is part of our goals to sort of contribute back to the field of education. I've hosted interns that cost us absolutely nothing in my office for years. This was the first year we had a resident, and the residents are full-time. So it's like a full-time staff member that has been with us, helping facilitate budget workshops, learning a lot about district finance in the process. And so we won't be participating in that program next year. It's a great sort of capacity builder, and it's a nice to have. So we've eliminated that as well. If you go to the next slide, there are some pretty significant reorganizations of our library and digital learning teams. We have 2 vacancies in digital learning right now that we're absorbing. The 2 remaining digital learning teachers will become sort of multi-level roles, one that will serve K-5 and one that will serve grades 6 through 8. Those positions, by and large, sort of support teachers in integrating technology into their classrooms, help them make sure all the glitches are worked out, help them learn new strategies for integrating technology meaningfully in schools. Given some of the AI work that's been happening and some of the tools available to teachers and tools that aren't available, this team has been fairly stretched, and they're going to see a pretty significant reduction. But those also aren't positions that directly teach right now, and so that's why we did not backfill those vacancies. We've also reorganized our librarians. We added librarians back into the budget after 22 years following a failed override last year. We have not eliminated or reduced any of those positions in either of these budgets, but we have reduced the library paraprofessionals that support the school libraries. And that will just be an operational challenge that our librarians and teams at the schools will try to work through as we check out books and manage inventory and everything else. There is a reduction to music, art, PE specialists at the elementary level. It's important to note that these are not changes in programming for kids. The special schedule remains the same. What these reductions are corrections to corrections based on sections, essentially, on enrollment. So we have fewer elementary sections than we had several years ago. With fewer sections, we could more efficiently schedule our specialists. It will make things difficult. It's going to make for some very inelegant schedules and less flexibility for some of our schools that have fewer sections than they had several years ago. It's doable though, and there are districts who do it, so we are able to absorb a little bit of savings there. And then at the bottom of this and of the the no scenario change sheet, we've captured the approximate retirement savings. Retirement savings from teachers who are retiring, and I asked actually our union president a couple weeks ago, like, is this happening because people are trying to make room to save people's jobs? And she said, yes, it is. So we have a lot of educators who have been wondering, when am I going to step back and retire? And a large number of them this year have decided that now's the moment. And so we captured a lot of savings in retirements and wanted to make sure that that was explicitly laid out here as well. It was the jobs.
Yeah. So next slide, just here, one pager. This is again in your budget book. I believe it's page 24 and 25. So this is the bottom of the change summary for scenario A. You can see with that icon. So for context, when we're presenting the amount that's being saved on the right-hand side, or an increase cost, that's the 27 budget against the originally approved FY26 budget. So you compare numbers in this year's budget against last year's book for consistency purposes. So specifically to transportation, as you can see here, the top two largest drivers or increases year over year. Some of these are things that we've already addressed in this year's budget with our revised budget, transferring from some vacancies in some other areas earlier this year to cover those. So our actual year over year increase on our revised budget is not as significant, but this might just stand out just because it's against last year's originally approved budget. So digging into some of the areas historically in the past, the book would always include out of district transportation and tuition. It would also focus on utilities. There's a couple other areas depending on year over year would be highlighted. So this is kind of an area that highlights some areas in the budget operationally that are increasing significantly higher, or for maybe capital cash related reasons above and beyond just a relatively normal 2, 3, 4% inflation rate. So speaking to sped tuition and transportation, most of this increase, about 918 of that 1.3, is related to transportation. And again, that's over last year's originally approved budget. All throughout the Commonwealth, it's nothing unique to Arlington. It's nothing unique just to us in this area, stay in the lab collaborative area, but transportation costs, out of district transportation, are significantly increasing. There's a couple different reasons why, kind of depends on the school, the placement in the area. What we are seeing at the end is more and more rides are being consolidated, or not being consolidated, from say 2 Arlington students to Burlington going to a school, and we would pay for half that bus. Instead, we're seeing that one bus take just the Arlington kids to said school to stay under an hour or whatever it is to get to that school. As a result of our transportation contract, we pay a percentage of Arlington kids on each bus. If we're the only kids on that bus, or we have one kid drop off, we pay for the full cost of that bus. Likewise, some schools, most of our behavioral schools, some of them have adjusted to having students arrive on a bus by themselves and with an aide instead of being on a bus with other kids due to behavioral reasons. Again, this isn't anything unique to us or particular cases here, but I'm just speaking in general. So we are across the whole Commonwealth, again, not just us seeing these significant increases. So again, we have revised our budget in our current year to help accommodate this, and then our budgeting next year, assuming a little bit of a baseline from there. For utilities, I already spoke to this a little bit, but here in both scenarios now, there is a decrease of about $400,000 on the operating budget. Again, about 100, I think it's 184 of that 250K that's additionally going into the building rentals is directly for utilities. And then we have $254,000 reduction baseline of our current year operating budget to what our next year's projection was from the sustainability manager here for the town. Again, that's the high school fully coming online in 27, whereas 26 still had some lingering old high school bills. This year we're in, and next year the full high school solar arrays are available to us. Hardy and Bishop solar arrays are available to us. The parking lot here at the high school is available to us. So we're seeing those investments greatly reduce our current year as well as next year electrical costs, but then also on the operating budget, Again, it's about $180,000 additionally is going into the revolving account to help relieve the operating budget. And now going on to the next slide, we can skip to the next chart. This is now scenario B, or the no on the override scenario where we're level funded in the school department. Again, these charts are going to look very similar. I'll speak high level, hand it off to the superintendent to speak about staffing, and then I'll return for operations. Here for FY27 in the no override scenario, again, it's level funded at 103.6. The operations year-over-year increase isn't too dissimilar from scenario A, and then therefore you can see the reductions in the no override scenario for staffing through attrition, through efficiencies, or through reductions or restructuring. It goes from the 1.8 to about 6.7, and so the superintendent will speak to those here.
Okay. Next slide. So these reductions are significantly more impactful and more comprehensive. So again, I'm not going to speak to each one, but I'm happy to answer questions about how any one of these is sort of operating in the budget. So these reductions in the no scenario come with really significant eliminations or consolidations in school and district leadership, including teacher leadership, including teaching positions themselves, and increases to class sizes. I would argue that a lot of the academic success we have seen has been because we have some of these roles in the system. And so I can unequivocally guarantee that should we lose some of those, we would see a pretty significant impact to some of those outcomes, possibly not right away, but eventually. So starting at central office, the no scenario has deeper reductions to central office, more consolidations, the elimination of roles any role that is not like a critical function, like enrolling students, getting everybody registered, we have to do that. Managing the money, we have to do that. But roles like the equity, access, and opportunity specialist are tied to contracts. This particular role helps us to provide 18 hours of professional development and inclusive practice that contractually teachers have to do in order to gain tenure in the Arlington Public Schools, which is a provision in the contract that we're very proud of. We and AEA are very proud of that. It's an accountability mechanism that's built into the contract, and we would need to eliminate that position. So there are roles like that that end up additionally in central office being reduced in the no scenario. The rest of those are similar, but there's an additional reduction in facilities to one of the maintenance roles that has been vacant. It's important to note that while I have the full salary offset in this chart, there would be expenses incurred as a result of not backfilling one of the trades on the town side, because we would have to call contractors out when we have emergencies. So it's not a direct offset. It's not quite to that amount, but it's difficult for us to project precisely how often we would need to call an electrician out, for example. Next slide. One of my biggest concerns about the no override budget is this loss of some of the accountability structures. There's a significant reduction to assistant principals starting at the Gibbs, and then more on some subsequent slides that are for the elementary schools, as well as high school dean positions. So those are on this slide. There are 2 administrative roles at the high school that would be reduced, even though they would have more students in the no scenario. We did put back some resources in some of these cases in an effort to not have the full weight of those reductions hit. So for example, there's a reduction of an administrator of high school counseling, but then an add back of a 0.5 school counselor to help offset some of the caseload impact that could have, because in the yes override budget, that role is reduced. The assistant director of high school counseling is reduced to take on a caseload. So in the yes budget, what we did was put some counseling in because we needed to at high school in order to reduce an administrative position. But in this version, that position is completely gone, and this 0.5 counseling is added back just so that we know that we have enough counselors to support the students. The dean role is reduced, so we would have the same number of deans with about 300 more students at the high school. Deans are a very sort of student-facing role. They deal with student level situations every day. We would need to more deeply take a look at student-facing roles in school counseling and social work. These are reduced with caseloads in mind, and so we've looked at sort of how many students a social worker or a school counselor is serving across every school and tried to level set the caseloads in both scenarios. At the bottom of the slide, you'll see the reduction of $650,000, and that is sort of replaced by athletic fees. So that's dollars coming out of the general fund budget and being placed in a revolving account to offset the coaches' stipends and materials for the athletic teams. And I'll talk a little bit more about fees in a moment. On the next slide, you start to see the biggest direct impact of reductions on students in the buildings because we move into some of the middle school, elementary school, where we don't have quite as many students as we do at high school. At the elementary schools, that will include a loss of 9 classroom teachers, a new cap of, when we do section allocation, I generally cap at 25, the average number of students per gen ed class. In the no override pass scenario, in grades 3 to 5, that cap is increased to 27 average students per class. There will be pretty wildly different class sizes in that situation because of the size of the schools. So it's difficult to balance the school and to balance the classes when you only have 3 sections. So there will be some grades that have relatively large sections of students, some grades that don't, by virtue of just sort of how the numbers shake out by grade level at that school. We would use buffer zone assignments and other mechanisms available to us to try to mitigate the impact of that. At the middle level, there would be a reduction of 4 core classroom teachers and about 1.5 elective teachers, and that class size cap would be at 27 as well. The teaching reductions would be in grades 6 and 7, not 8 yet, because the 8th grade is our biggest grade. That's sort of where the big enrollment bump is right now, and that'll move into the high school the following school year. We would also reduce our multilingual learner staff who support our English learners back to levels that we had when I started in Arlington. We have expanded those resources in recent years, both because we had more multilingual learners and because we wanted to do more inclusive push-in services for those students, because you learn English best when you're around English speakers, not when you're isolated in a separate room. So we would sort of reset back to where we were previously, and those caseloads would go up. And then finally, on the next slide, there is a significant reduction to assistant principals at the elementary level. Essentially, all of the schools that are smallest would have a 0.5 reduction or would share an assistant principal. This would really significantly hamper some of the instructional work we've been doing in the schools because the principals take the lead on a lot of that work, and they would be assuming some of the operational tasks that our assistant principals primarily handle now. That was a resource that was added the year before I arrived in Arlington, the assistant principals, which existed, but they sort of got built out to 1.0 at every school the year before I came. There would be a reduction in specialists according to the reduction in elementary sections, so there'd be more specialist reductions because there would be even fewer elementary sections. And then finally, the no scenario reinstitutes fees, which I would like to speak to for just a moment. The school committee and I are in agreement that we need to have some substantive discussion about fees in the schools, when and why we charge them, for which initiatives, how to make sure a fee is not an access barrier for students and families. But I just want to emphasize that while we know we need to have that conversation, and we will, a fee is a barrier, period. You can do all the things to communicate that you have all the financial assistance available. You can qualify anyone who asks for support, and still the fact of the fee will present an access barrier. There's been a ton of research and education that shows that this is the case. Fees are not reinstituted in the YES budget because the fees that support the programming that the fee supports is directly student facing. And so in thinking through what our options were, we tried to make reductions that we knew we could do without impacting student programming first in that YES override budget, and kept fees out. However, we also recognize that we'll probably have to have some more substantive conversations and potentially look into reinstitution of fees in the years ahead. I know that some of our success on student outcomes has had to do with the elimination of user fees, which we did back in 2022, and that we may need to consider them adding back in the future, even if the override passes. I have emphasized with the school committee that if we do so, I will be advocating for only doing so for those things that already feature access barriers like cut sports, as opposed to those things that are embedded in our school day, like instrumental music, for example. But what you see in the no override scenario puts fees back in both athletics and instrumental music, which happens during the regular school day, and saw a really significant increase in student participation the second we eliminated that fee, because a fee is a barrier, regardless of whether or not you have mechanisms in place to offset the impact of that barrier. And now operations.
Yep, so just wrapping up the scenario B, no on the override here, the operational changes. There aren't too many from the prior scenario, but I just want to highlight a few, particularly in devices and then for our lease program within the finance and within the IT department. These are kind of related to the capital cash change in the event of a failed override. We got guidance a couple months ago that in a failed override, you still have to pay your debt and manage that, but the capital cash would probably take a hit. So we across the board for anything that is purchased through capital cash currently would take at least a 30% hit. So that's been budgeted here for all of our staff, devices, laptops for teachers, paras and such. And then the last couple of weeks, a little bit larger of a reduction for student devices. So that's built here into our hardware budget for the no scenario. And then for both scenarios, the lease program for our copiers, it's currently a $120,000 project, has been reduced to 100. So in the yes, I've absorbed 20,000 of it. In the no is just an additional 30% on top of that. So not too many changes here from scenario A, but just wanted to highlight those in alignment with capital cash changes.
Okay. To close out, we just want to share a bit more information in response to some of the questions we've received. So bear with us for just a few more minutes. This graph is in one of the supplemental reports we sent along. It shows the salary allocations by contract type, which is a made-up category in an effort to be as clear as possible. But we have lots of different bargaining units, including contracts that are bargained separately. And even those like within that union, they are different. So some people receive like a hire letter and they're non-union. Some people are on a 3-year negotiated contract, like our principals and assistant superintendents. So even within like one category, there are other categories. But what this breaks us out into, and we did this by object code, because by object code in the budget, generally we charge one type of role to that object code. It's not universally true, but it's for the most part true. So this is giving an idea, but not a perfect one, of what proportion of the overall budget each of these different role types is taking up. Okay, so teachers are obviously the largest group. They've been hovering around that 60% mark of the overall budget. Paraprofessionals is a major category. You can see the increase that went along with a significant pay increase for them after the previous override. Our administration is along the bottom. And then we don't want to see these proportions of the budget get any higher, because if you add them all up together, that's 85% of the yes scenario budget. And as a goal, we really don't want that to take up any more, because we're going to be looking at deeper staffing cuts in the years ahead if it does, because of the rate at which some of these salaries increase. It is worth noting also, so we sent this along, and we also sent along some FTE counts that we hope are helpful to look at. The FTE counts from DESE, the way they capture teacher, if you go and look at any of the reports online, is not how I would recommend you capture teacher as a type of role. And that's because they're tied to rosters. So sometimes people will look at the DESE reports and they will say, DESE says you only have 400 something teachers. We don't. We have about 800 AEA members. About 150 of them are paraprofessionals. The rest of them are teachers. It's just that DESE, if they're not rostered to a classroom, so if they're a nurse, if they're a social worker, if they are a service provider, if they're a special educator, like all of those service roles are teachers that don't map to DESE's way of capturing that. And so that's the only caveat I would ever give to say, don't look at DESI and assume that this is the better accurate number. For the most part, they're pretty spot on. But in this one thing, they make it look like we have far fewer teachers than we actually do, because they don't see in the way we send the state report all of our teachers, just because of how they gather that information. I also, on the next slide, late today, ran this same analysis for the no budget, and sent that along. And I think it was forwarded to you probably later this afternoon, or this evening. So this is what that same breakout looks like for the no budget. Salaries make up 83.4% of that version of the budget. So we got a little closer to better balance on salaries and operations there. But still, the salaries are taking up the vast majority, which makes sense because we are a service and staffing-based organization in the schools. And I will turn it over to Mr. Schweitzer to talk a little bit about some of our revolving and enterprise accounts.
Yep. So slide 39 is just a review of two of kind of our enterprise funds that we have in the public schools. These aren't on the funding summary chart as we're not budgeting planned operational offsets directly into them, but I know there's been questions about Arlington Community Ed, or ACE, and then our Arlington After School program, or just After School program is all referred to it. So these are self-sustaining programs within the district. There's direct charges within them. They raise revenues appropriately in respect to guidelines of revolving accounts in Massachusetts for our school department, and then related expenses to it are charged for its staff, its programs, as well as some indirect costs. So both of these funds, the revenues that are raised within them are specifically for the purposes of those funds. So for after school, it's for after school fees and tuition for kids during the school year, vacation weeks, summer, and then for ACE, it could be for adult and or for students, either during vacation weeks, after school, and then even during the summer as well. So that's from which the revenues are raised, and then they directly invest and spend in accordance with that. So the staff members that are full-time, the instructors, any vendors they bring on, any food, any supplies, any materials, those are directly charged from this fund, so it's self-contained, just like any other enterprise fund. We also, to the extent that we can, we do have some indirect costs that are charged here. So for the full-time staff or eligible staff that have health insurance, we do charge that, and that gets assessed within these funds. We charge both in the after-school program and ACE a rent assessment, so that assists with some of the custodial detail that takes place, because if those ACE events or after school were not taking place, we wouldn't then not be paying those custodial details. So that's kind of a direct offset of that over time, if you will, there. So to the extent we do have some indirect costs charged there as well. The other thing I do want to note here, just kind of on this report, is there's kind of a difference between a starting and ending balance here, and then kind of where the dips of cash flow might take place. So for example, both of these programs heading into the summer are receiving their revenues in April, May, June as people register. So that kind of year-end balance or starting balance is a little inflated because they're spending all that money all the next couple months until you get to September. So some of these accounts could get to just a couple $100,000 of cash flow, depending on the seasonality of the year. So that beginning year, ending year balance is a little skewed, but at least it's even and consistent across to kind of tell that story. Beyond the programs that these two actually provide, I'm very happy to build a relationship with Todd and with Jen with these programs, because I think as an extension of the public schools, they are a public school department in these enterprise funds. It's one of the ways that we can really bring people into, especially ACE, into our buildings to see our beautiful facilities take place in here and build a community. It's parents, it's grandparents, people new to town to build community. So I'm really proud of the program and offerings that these two provide and the public value that they both provide.
Before you move on, I just want to highlight that ACE this year, as we plan for the summer, has worked directly with the deputy superintendent to plan for Title I programming that provides more access to a fuller day for our students who benefit from that programming. And some of the resources that are part of the ACE programming, so she's added like support for students who have disability but maybe want to take ACE classes in the summer. Those supports then become available to some of the Title I programming. So one of the things, if we were to lose our Title I funding stream, we would look for and try to figure out how to do is use some of our community education resources to sustain some degree of support for kids over the summer who might be in need of that extra academic boost. So we are starting to think about like what's our strategy if we lose some of these resources. And there's some option here for us to partner with community ed while still staying within the parameters of that fund and making sure that we're spending dollars on community education. There are a lot of restrictions around what we can and cannot move, which expenses we can and cannot move onto those funds. So it has to be in support of its charter, its sort of rules of engagement in order for us to tap any of those dollars.
Thank you. Next slide, moving on to circuit breaker. Trying to answer a couple questions we got ahead of time on circuit breaker, and apologize if this creates more questions, but so what is circuit breaker? You know, how do we use it? How does it increase year over year or decrease, and exactly how is it used? So first and foremost, circuit breaker is a reimbursement program. So per formula, and I'll kind of get into an example, but per statute, the reimbursement program of circuit breaker is reimbursing a percentage of excessive sped costs from a year that's already incurred. So if I am experiencing X cost this year, per formula, which I'll get into, is part of that can get reimbursed, and I'll recognize that next year as part of my receipt. So it's reimbursement based on stuff that's already happened. The state added transportation as part of the Student Opportunity Act. It was delayed a year due to COVID, so it kicked in FY21. You'll see there in that third column for transportation that they slowly phased it in over 3 years as a result of kind of revenues coming out of COVID a little low. So tuition and instruction has always been reimbursed at 75% above the threshold, which I'll define in a moment. And then transportation was slowly ramped up with the goal by statute to be at that 75%, which was first actualized in 24 through supplemental appropriation. So that column I have there that says claim threshold in this current year is $53,000. The way that the reimbursement works, not to get too in the weeds, but if you can follow, a tuition's $100,000, you reduce that claim threshold, so that's about $47,000. I can then be reimbursed 75% of that 47, so about 35. So if I spend 100 now, I'm going to get reimbursed 35 to potentially be used for next year or the year after. And so that's both for tuition, for any other instructions like home services or an aid a student might have, but then also in the last few years for anything that's for tuition related in an aid that might be on that transportation as well. One thing I want to know about the transportation is I do have it marked here in FY24. Originally, the appropriation from the general court was only 47% to be reimbursed for transportation. This eventually got to 75%, and it was as a result of the Fair Share Amendment or the Millionaire's Tax. Part of that year-end appropriation boosted this back up to 75%. So the district did benefit, got about another $125,000 that we've been able to carry into this year. You'll notice this year, claims from 25 we're recognizing this year is only at 61%. So our reimbursement is what it is, but if that were to happen again here in June, an additional appropriation boosted that to 75, that'd be about another $75,000 that the district could recognize and carry into next year. So how do we use circuit breaker? How do we budget for it? How do we use it in best practice and in actuality? So in best practice, or legally, you're able to carry up to 1 year carryover. So it's not a current year receipt and then excess goes to general fund or free cash. You're able to carry it for 1 year. So best practice is that I am able to budget fact certain that this is my receipt I'm getting in FY26 right now, which is the $2.227 million number, and I'm budgeting that next year to be used for tuition. So if I'm able to carry a year legally up to a year, then I can budget fact certain knowing next year. When you see a lot of districts around us that mid-year are out of money and drastically cutting, some on the South Coast, South Shore, it's because they did not carry up to that legal amount or even their current year reimbursement. So I'm very happy to come into a district here just this past fall that did follow that practice and carried up to 99% of that circuit breaker from last year. So that is why in this year's budget, we're able to take that $2.2 million number and I can budget that off of our tuitions on the general fund for this upcoming year. This is really the only kind of reserve we have or working place beyond the SPED reserve. The SPED reserve was set up by statute in FY20. This is the actual separate SPED stabilization fund. This was set up by statute and any municipality can contribute to it up to 2% of net school spending. The district contributed in FY20 and FY21, summing up to $774,000 that has accrued some interest over the last handful of years and started this year at $815,000. So we have, as of today, a little over $815,000 in that SPED stabilization account. No money's come out. There is a process for that money to come out. But once that money does come out to pay for a tuition or a transportation bill, then that reduces the principal and reduces the amount of interest that can maintain and accrue in that account. So generally, if any monies for significant spend in a significant year need to be recognized, you might tap circuit breaker first, because then that gets claimed and then replenished in future years. So just kind of want to present this at what is circuit breaker? It's a reimbursement program. It is basically a claim of excessive sped costs above and beyond the threshold that the state generally applies about a 2 to 4% COLA every year. And then we're able to use that receipt in the current year and budget back certain a year ahead. It's the best practice to carry that year. Very fortunate to come to a district that has had that practice. And then the only thing above and beyond that we really do have any sort of reserve for is that sped reserve. Again, it's a little over 815,000 right now. It's a little cumbersome to get money out because it has to come out from school committee and from select board. But again, just wanted to kind of answer some questions we received ahead of time. If I've opened up any other questions, I'm certainly happy to answer those as well.
So I will close us out by saying that building one budget is a challenge. Building two brand new ones is about the best example of trial by fire I think I ever could have imagined for our spectacular Mr. Schweitzer. Well done, thank you. And I also want to acknowledge all the difficulty of what I'm sure is the difficulty of your roles as members of Finance Committee this year. I'm sure you've had a lot of difficult deliberations, and that tonight's discussion likely will not be an exception to that rule. So thank you for any time you've spent digging through documentation that we have sent. Apologies that it came to you as quickly after the vote on Thursday as we could possibly get it to you. Apologies for any errors in any of the reports we then generated in about 24 hours of working time between then and now. We're really proud of the work we're doing in APS. We're also cognizant of the town's financial outlook. And as a superintendent, I'm acutely aware of the challenges that face myself and my superintendent colleagues all over the state. We're trying to be responsive to new regulations, to fund required services, to make sure that our schools are not excluding kids due to factors that are well beyond their control. I am the daughter of a middle school math teacher and elementary principal, and I've been an educational leader and teacher for the last 2 decades, and I am deeply concerned for the future of the field of education right now, if I'm being honest. Schools get squeezed from all sides. Federal funding and reimbursement programs are either level funded right now or at risk of disappearing. State aid isn't growing at the rate of expenses, and really no revenues are growing at the rate of expenses for individuals and for the collective of us. And so, we are limited in how much we can collect in revenue. We understand that. Arlington doesn't sit along a major commercial corridor. We don't have space to build an office park that we can tax at a different rate. And so we're contributing to the group project. And we understand that that means that we are going to have to make some difficult decisions over the next few years, even if the override passes. And we've made a number of them for next year, even if it does. So, we always come articulating both reductions and additions. It's something I really feel strongly about, that we shouldn't be saying we're going to do this extra thing without saying what we're going to stop doing. And so we've always walked into this meeting talking about what we're going to reduce or make more efficient and what we're going to improve upon. This is the first time I think we've come with a net reduction generally of staffing, and it is in a moment where we do not have a net reduction of kids in our schools. And so, we're reliant upon, over the next few years, retirements continuing, some reduction in enrollment that we've anticipated for a while and have yet to see. And, we are worried that should we need to implement scenario B, it's going to compromise our ability to operate with high support and accountability, and to ensure instructional excellence that we've attained and have been so proud of over the past year. And so, we really want to meet the high expectations of a town that deeply values education. We're worried that we won't be able to do that. And I appreciate everybody's attention to all of the materials we presented, and I look forward to a discussion and answering your questions.
All right, thank you very much. All right, who has some questions? Any questions? Alan?
Thank you. I apologize if I missed this, but way back on page 9, there was a big reduction in international tuition.
Yes, I can speak to that. So this is, for everyone's references on, slide 9. This is in both of the revolving account sections on the bottom of the funding chart. So for that one, the foreign exchange tuition, so the rationale behind this was, in our current year, we are experiencing less students entertaining to come from out of the country into Arlington, and in general, we're seeing less travel, even from Canada, and people just doing weekend trips into the US. This is a decrease off of the prior year. I think in prior year, I have to look back at the notes, but I think we had 24 students last year, and I think a majority of them were full year, so they were here for 2 semesters. I think it was 18 of the 24, and then 6 were half. This year we only have 18 students, only 7 of them are full-time, and then 11, I think that's the number, 11 are only here for 1 semester. So right now we're only looking at raising about $200,000 of revenue in an account that's had north of 400 or so in the past and in recent memory. We were seeing about a half reduction. We're working with the vendor that's still, reaching out and attracting, but assuming that gets halved again, or this trend kind of continues, we wanted to ensure that this fund is sustainable and can still maintain the direct cost that we have there. So that $90,000 you show there is a direct offset to the budget that operationally is supporting the coordinator that's in that role, as well as the program supplies and professional development that's within that. So this really ensures the sustainability of that program. If revenues do come above and beyond that, then that's something we can have additional offsets for, but this at least programs some sort of sustainability for this program and the operating budget.
Do you think that's, is this a political thing, or do you think there's something more fundamental that's reducing that? How many students are we talking about?
Yep, so this program, so I think our program with the vendor, we can attract up to 40 students, and I think in the past we have had in 30s.
Yeah.
But again, I think it was 24 last year, but most of them were here for a full year. This year it's only, what did I say, 18? I think it's 18 or so, I think it's 11 and 7. So the students that are here are only here for half the semester.
It's hard to say.
I don't want to get on. I don't want to get on.
Yeah, no, I
It's
guess I'm
obvious.
wondering,
Yeah.
It appears to follow a trend.
There's a lot of-
Something else going on.
There's a lot of parents around the world that want to send their children to school in the United States.
Yeah.
That's a fact.
Yeah.
We all know that.
I'm sorry, Jeff.
So the other thing that makes this confusing is that line is capturing both income and pulling from the savings. And over the past 5 years, we have greatly reduced what was in that reserve account
Okay.
down to very little. And so that's why you're seeing a big change from last year to this year. I mean, it's a combination of both the decrease in student enrollment and also there isn't reserves to pull from in that account, whereas there was before.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
In years past, when I was much younger, I used to go into the special revenue and revolving fund accounts in the schools, and there was quite often, as of June 30th, a substantial surpluses there, fund balances, if you want. And I haven't done that recently, but are there some fund balances in those special revenue accounts that you could pull to help support the general education?
Sure. So I'll just speak first in practice of how we built the budget this year, and then I can speak to fund balances. So for FY27, when you see those numbers there, we can directly point to where every one of those dollars is directly offset in operation. So that's basically netting our forecast for revenue to come in and to come out. We don't have a significant balance, I believe, between all of these on that chart. So not included after school and ACE. This year began with $252,000 of balance. So that's between all of them. And some of them are rather nominal and could be spent down to zero, like maybe not in preschool, could be spent down to zero. I think we started the year with 25,000. So some of these strategically we could work to have in and outs to get down to zero. The only one that might have a little bit of excess that could be built into it is like building rentals for 2 factors. One, as I spoke to when I got to ACE and after school, is we do charge a rent assessment in there, and we do have some other indirect costs that could be in place strategically that is still sustainable and mutually beneficial for the program. Say it's a % of revenue. As they grow, also our rent could grow as well, but it's sustainable with them. But that could also support additional offsets into the budget. That building rentals also, though, is where we have strategically or historically charged all of our snow-related items. So we do have a snow-related contract with the vendor, which has been greatly exceeded this year on both town and school side. We've bought significantly more pallets of salt. We have overtime for all the custodians that have come in to be able to allow us to open up, even if it is after one snow day, to clear the road, sidewalks, and everything like that. take you to the DPW, but then also our custodians and laborers we have. If we have a significantly cold winter, kind of like we have right now, having a little bit of a balance in that rentals account allows me to not have to tap into reclasses and get cute on the operating budget and then tap into circuit breaker for sped when it's not necessarily because of sped. So that is something the committee and I are looking to kind of discuss a little bit further about what is a healthy balance in some of these inappropriate, so that it isn't extreme. But also I will allow there's some accounts that we could potentially at year end always try and drill down to zero and return to some free cash. So that's a discussion we're still kind of having. I'm open to have it here as well, and we can report back.
So what you're seeing there are the planned charges, offsets that we're gonna put on those accounts. I'll just add to what Mr. Schweitzer was saying, that rental account has offset snow, which can be a little unpredictable. Also, we had some surprises with regards to energy costs with the high school transitions and the flip, because there were some additional energy meters that weren't charged to us at the time we expected them, and so then we got a bill that we were surprised by. We've used that account to offset some of those, so that balance had come down pretty significantly over a couple of years, and we had some turnover in facilities that had a few surprises come with it because they were absent an administrative assistant for a while, they were absent a director for a while. So turnover can also significantly impact some of the planning around this, but one of the things Mr. Schweitzer has done that's very different from the last couple of years when we've had turnover in his role is that this is very explicit in the budget, what we are planning to charge that would otherwise go to the general fund, but is going to go to the rental account. Mr. Mason had been trying to do a lot of that when he was here and get stable about it. Some of that stability in turnover of role and with, frankly, me trying to manage some of that was lost, but this year it's very purposefully planned in to make sure that we know what those offsets will be in the accounts we can do offsets with. We can't do that with ACE and after school in the same way.
If you wanted to look at the after-school program in community ed, where would you go? So, you know, if you're going online into the school budget, is there a specific area that would have that information?
So the chart, the slide that I presented to you tonight was created just for tonight. It's not embedded within a prior presentation or within the budget book. I know that on the staffing side, there were some FTEs and other reports regarding staff in those funds, but on the operational side, no, primarily because there was no direct offset additionally in operations. So it's operating a little bit differently from the preschool, which is an integrated program. This doesn't cover the full preschool program. You know, Piercefield and likewise, those are more enterprises, self-sustaining, food, after-school program, ACE, are kind of their own.
Okay, well, will this presentation be on the Finance Committee minutes?
100%.
Okay, and then one last question. I think it's always a good philosophy to do one crisis at a time.
Sure.
If the override doesn't pass, 27 is the easy budget.
Yep.
28 and 29 are the real hard ones, like 2 or 3 times. Have you snowballed those, what's going to be happening in those budgets?
So yes, and yes, those are the tough years. So the reductions in the no override scenario are significantly deeper with staffing than the yes on purpose. And it's because of this. It's because we want to make sure that we're not changing everything all at once. And so we would reduce deeper than absolutely necessary in 27 in an effort to make sure that we're spreading that pain out a little bit, that we're doing some of the big shifts in staffing models one at a time, as opposed to all at the same time, which is more disruptive to the kids' learning. We have articulated in a presentation we did on January 8th, we had sort of projected forward into a 28-29 set of determinations we would have to make with the school committee at that time. Because also, like, it's worth noting, there's, you know, an election happening, so we don't have the full body of people who would need to make determinations about how we would move forward in 28 and 29. So we didn't want to make decisions ahead of time, but we did want to give people a picture of what that could look like. That is going to involve us looking at redistricting, consolidation of schools, closing schools, in the event that we are facing the deficit that exists for 28. So it'll be considerably more dramatic And we would also see dramatically higher class sizes than just the 27 probably, because at that point you have to reduce special educators, you have to reduce service providers, you have to reduce interventionists. We see a lot of the important work we've done go away.
Okay, thank you.
Over.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So on the IT side, the cutting the deputy director, even in the override passes, seems to have been a late decision based on the fact that I got information earlier that said that was going to have the conversations I had with the CIO. Also, that was her impression. So what's the thinking behind that?
So right now, one of the things that we looked at when we were looking at all the positions in the district was, what relative to size of department, size of school, number of students served, where do we have room to maneuver and make sure that we look across levels of the organization. We were not shy about cutting administrative roles across both scenarios. Now, I will say the no override has a lot more administrative reduction, in part because it's 2 assistant principals and directors whose roles we can't eliminate completely because of compliance tasks that are associated with some of what they do, but are sort of partially reduced. This position has been vacant since October. The facilities department has 1 deputy assistant director. It is similar with regard to scope and size. This is what some of what the town manager and I just have discussed, as well as Ms. Shepherd. And it seemed that model-wise, with regards to sort of staffing departments that move across both town and schools, that it could make sense for us not to backfill this for now, to realize some additional reductions. The school committee additionally was weighing multilingual learner positions, specialist positions, and what in my original proposal was a reduction of specials for the kids at elementary by, it was like a 6th. It was a small number of classes, but it was still a reduction of classes. We wanted to put that back if we could. This was a reduction that was an option for us to more deeply consider. They asked that I go to the town manager and discuss it with him. He and I arrived at being able to support that in favor of putting some multilingual learner teachers back and some specialists back.
All right, well, I'll just say my concern there is it's going to be hard without those people to make any progress on cybersecurity.
I would say that there is a new role that is explicitly dedicated to that in IT, who appears to be doing a fantastic job with some of that work. That this also was a role that we sort of had a town side deputy and a school side deputy in IT, and that had been reorganized not too long ago. And that there are other structures now within that department, supervisory of the technicians, that are supportive of the schools. And we've had a couple crises happen. They've been very well handled and managed. And so, we do not require a school side deputy of IT when we have roles specifically dedicated to cybersecurity in the town. We thought that was more important, so maintain that.
Chuck, and then Charlie, and then Beth.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for all this work. It's very thorough. Couple of questions I had. Why does special ed go up in scenario B?
Yeah, it's a good question. So in scenario A, it's extremely lean, as we've kind of discussed. The projection in scenario A for special education for out of district and transportation are based on the current kids we know as of the development of this budget. So we know what next year's tuition rates are going to be for their schools as of today, if you will. Those are set by the state, by the Operations Services Division. So we know the COLA or the increase of tuition next year for all of our kiddos, as well as we're putting in a projection for transportation. This budget for scenario A is budgeting just what we know right now. If we have an additional kid go out, if we have a current student's IEP change, and add an aide on a bus, or they go to a different placement, that is something that if salary savings or otherwise can't support, that'd be where we might be looking at circuit breaker or those available sped funds that are there for us. What I would ideally love to have is kind of what you see in scenario B. So as part of the additional reductions that are made on staffing to kind of reset that level in case we have to go into 28 and 29, is you kind of put a placeholder for potential changes that could occur in SPED. So there could be students that we don't know right now are currently out and not a district placement that do go out next year and can kind of come from that conservative number, if you will. The other thing too is that every 7 years or so, a public school that is, or a private school, a SPED school that's approved by the state can ask for a restructuring of their rate. So next year, right now, all the inflation is 3.04%. A school could say, I want 25%, and they could get awarded that. If we have 6 kids there, that could be a couple $100,000 hit. So that has been budgeted conservatively and naturally to form of how I've normally done it in other districts in that scenario. So that one does have a little bit of a buffer that generally is standard practice within SPED to cover any of those unknowns we know. Because we're building the budget in October, November for 7 to 20 months out. Try not to do live math. Scenario A, again, is a very lean SPED projection. And if we go above and beyond, that's where we're going to have to tap into our reserves of circuit breaker and or that SPED stabilization. So it's just a very lean projection. And that's the difference.
Second question, I might know the answer, but the outer district transportation spend goes up in scenario B as well.
Scenario B. So, okay, so to the same measure, if say we potentially have 3 more students go out, I'm also budgeting a transportation kind of sensitivity for that as well.
That would happen in B, but not happen in A.
Correct, because A is just based on our current number of students, and I don't want to say anything that could identify kids, but say I have 3 more kids go out of district, say all 3 of them have transportation, there's also associated transportation.
Scenario A is
Potentially
a
of those
risky
places.
allocation.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Scenario A is a risky allocation. Scenario B is an appropriate allocation, I would argue.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Last question. Scenario B, you have contracted software and devices for $295K, but scenario A, just contracted software.
Yep, so,
Why the devices in scenario B?
yep, so scenario
Maybe you
B,
might explain it.
no,
I
sorry,
didn't hear it.
no,
Yeah, we didn't know.
it's a good point. So in scenario B, some of those things like the devices or the copier lease is supported by capital cash from the capital committee. And so in the event of no scenario, basically we've been working with the guidance that at least a 30% reduction in some of those investments would have to be operationalized, or we would go without, or fees would have to be re-implemented or reinstituted. So that additional operating money in the no scenario is because we're operationalizing some devices that otherwise would be purchased by capital.
Yeah, okay, thank you. That's it.
Charlie?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, thank you, Dr. Holman and Mr. Schweitzer, for a very impressive, clear, and succinct presentation. Really, really good. And Dr. Holman, congratulations on the performance of the students on those statewide tests. That's really great. But I would like to ask one of my favorite questions, which is, what's going on with the achievement gap?
It's closing, believe it or not.
It's closing.
It's closing. So, I mean, we have different focal groups we track it for.
You don't have to go into all the details. I just wanted to get the bottom line answer. So
We're seeing some
we're making
good
progress on the achievement gap as well as the top line.
results. Mhm.
Thank you. Second question is, actually, I was going to ask the same question that Chuck did with respect to the SPED cost. Thank you for that explanation. Do you know, are the numbers on your slides the same numbers that are reported to DESE for special education costs? Because I couldn't quite correlate.
So it depends on which number you're looking at. Can you be more specific about where you were?
Well, there's
looking?
a DESE report that or a spreadsheet they publish with all of the special education costs.
Mhm.
Then they have the total for the years. And I just eyeballed it, and it didn't look like they were matching one-to-one with your line.
Yes, this is end of year report differences between how we, like what we
Yeah.
have in a budget versus
Yeah.
what we report to the state at the end of the year.
So it might be a little bit nuanced, but let me just start with the basis of, we build our budget, the background of our budget in our general ledger on the accounting system obviously aligns with the town's finances, but it supports how we report to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed. So at the end of every fiscal year, we have what we call the end of year report. So we report all of our financial information for revolving accounts, for grants, for general fund that have occurred in that year on city and town to the state. And then part of that is what supports future funding back to the school district, reimbursements and likewise. Where there might be discrepancy, or at least I'll say this, when you report expenditures on the general fund, there is a separate column for sped. Where maybe the data doesn't speak to maybe a rolled up number is that we report again by different funds. So for example, if I'm reporting tuition, a report might only pull tuition that's on the operating fund. But if I'm also putting 2 million on circuit breaker, I'm wondering if maybe that's a disconnect. We could also be looking at funds based on like a grant and operating for staff that's on our IDEA 240 grant. We have a significant amount of staff that's on that budget. So without seeing the data, there's unfortunately nuance that might lead you one way or another. But I will say that we do report to DESI in the manner that they require. Our general ledger supports that. And we do specifically report SPED. But when we do that, it's
So
Yeah.
revolving. It's a lot of
not
stuff.
tonight, but sometime I would like to understand
Yeah.
how to make the correlation between your numbers and the numbers that report the SPED, because I've been tracking the SPED cost for 10 years. And then suddenly I see a bunch of historic numbers that don't match the SPED numbers, and I'm a little bit lost.
A big piece of that is that so historically, we had a schedule in the budget book that was special education. And the reason we included that was because of the breakout that we had on the town long-range plan of SPED growth versus gen ed growth. What we have found, because that's just sort of how schools work, is that we provide like early intervention services. They're not special education services that are gen ed resources, and that some of the same people also provide SPED services. And so parsing what is SPED spend and what is gen ed spend. There's a very blurry line between those two. And so with what the state gathers is spending that is aligned with an IEP as part of our end of year reporting. They will include sort of whatever we tell them to include on end of year reporting, which actually we adjusted last year because there were a number of service providers like nurses that were providing services per a student need, but were not being included in our end of year report as a service provider, contributing to SPED spending. So those numbers have been sort of artificially depressed because they've only captured special educators, like things that are clearly 1.0 full salaries worth of SPED spending, or out of district tuition, fully a special ed spend. There are other things that are, some of their day is special education, like a counselor might provide counseling services because it's on a student's IEP, but the rest of their day, they're meeting with other students, not as part of their SPED service. So it's figuring out precisely what we spend on special education is kind of impossible because it happens in the context of a larger school day. And like, we don't count the hours that an administrator might spend in an IEP meeting, for example. We don't parse it with that much detail. So how we capture it in the student services department in a budget is going to look different from how the state is going to gather that data in an end of year report, because they have to put it up on a website. And so we do our best to get as close to accurate on the end of year report and the final spending as we can, while still including all of the different services the students with IEPs get, so that that's as close to a real capture as possible on expenses. When we budget, we do it by the department level. And now student services includes nursing, counseling, social work, all of whom provide services, but not for all of their day. They provide services to all kids and kids with IEPs.
Thank you.
Yeah.
A third question. So we had a meeting, a presentation by the Capital Planning Committee the other night. And they have a request in there for feasibility study for a new Addison school or renovation or something. And looking at, can you make some comments, please, on your demographic forecast? And number one, what the probability of getting MSBA support for such a building, given the fact that we just did a $300 million high school. Mm-hmm. And secondly, the process is going to be a multi-year process. It might be 5 years, it might be 8 years. We've been through this many, many times. Mm-hmm. And given your forecast, your demographic forecast, has there been any thought given to 8 years or 10 years out, what the demand for junior high or middle school space actually is gonna be? And will there be space in the high school, or will there be space at Gibbs? What does it look like?
Yeah, so great questions. So the MSBA, when we submitted an SOI, we did so kind of expecting that they would say, come back next year. And they didn't. So they said, we agree with you, because they do a survey every year, not every year. When was the last time they did? They did one this past year. I think previously it was before the pandemic. It was in like 2016 or something.
No, recently they did.
Yeah. They used to do it every 5 years. It had been like 10 since they had done the last one. And they go to every single school in the state. They walk all around. They give each school a score. Addison had done okay 10, 12 years ago when they last did this. They came back around this year. And this was not part of the SOI process. This actually happened right before that. And received a much lower score. So we've had somebody come in and do a capital assessment of the building, like look at the HVAC, look at the infrastructure, look at sort of what some of the challenges are on the roof and with the envelope, and provide an assessment of what the capital upkeep of the building would be. We did that in 2022, and it was pretty extreme. We wrote the SOI as a rebuild and not as a remodel because of some of what that report had uncovered, which I'm happy to send all of this documentation to everybody. The MSBA agreed with us that this is a critical need and said, we're going to invite you into feasibility process. The feasibility process includes an enrollment study. So it's going to get at some of the questions you're asking. Obviously, we are not going to have as many middle schoolers as we have now in several years. Part of the enrollment study we would want to do with them is to give us an idea of how many middle schoolers we might have about the time a school's coming online. MSBA does this with every single building project that they do, and they have their own in-house demographers who do some of this enrollment forecasting, and they did it with the high school too. Generally, they'll shoot a little lower than maybe we would guess at, and I think some of that is in an effort to make the most of resources. But we would work with them on that as part of feasibility. So the ask in the warrant for town meeting has to do with funding the feasibility study, which is going to assess where to site a school. It's going to assess the enrollment question. What we have been asked to tell MSBA in our submission of a statement of interest, and which was how we were awarded entry into the process, was to tell them what the biggest possible school would be that we would have, like how many grade levels. And then they'll do the enrollment process with us based on that. So what we said was we could have the same model, a 7, 8, and a 6, or we want to look at what would be involved in consolidating 6 through 8. If we were to do the 6 through 8, and we need to do all of the community engagement, we need to talk to people about this, so like none of this is decided yet, it's part of the feasibility process. But if we were to do a 6 to 8, it would likely come with pretty significant savings in some ways, because there are resources that are school specific. So for example, we would have one principal and some number of assistant principals, administrators, but we wouldn't need 2 principals. There are some roles that, like, we would probably have 1 librarian and maybe a para instead of 2 librarians. So there are some roles that we would not need as many of in a 1 middle school scenario. What that could also do is open up resources and other opportunities for consolidation of other schools, should we need to explore that, for the town to reclaim a building at somewhere in town. But we would want to base all of that on geographic trends at that time, on where we're seeing enrollment pressure in the schools, and on some of the engagement we would have to do with the community as part of feasibility. So all of that would play out over the next few years. We're in the eligibility period right now, which involves us doing some certifications, building a vision for what we think we would want the school to look like educationally, and then planning for the feasibility phase, which will answer a lot of the questions that you're asking as part of the MSBA process.
So looking at some of the other schools that are being built now, this is going to be a project in the $40-50 million range, probably.
Likely higher than that would be my guess, based on what their most recent metrics are. and reimbursed at about a 45% rate, I think is what we heard on the call the other day.
And likely, it'll be 5 years at least until it
Yes.
gets started, right?
Probably would be that would be my guess.
Thank you very much.
Rebecca?
Thank you. I had two questions about scenario B, about the no override scenario. The first was on the athletic fees. I realize that's not set in stone, but the $650,000 that's proposed for athletic fees, does that entirely cover the cost of high school sports, or about what fraction?
So that's about half, yeah.
It's about half.
About half, and that does not cover, sort of administrative costs that support all of the sports.
Yep.
So, the athletic trainer, the director, assistant director, admin assistant. It does not cover transportation to games. It does cover the supplies and materials for each of the sports and the contractual stipend for each of the sports.
So in an emergency, you would have some possibility to actually increase the sports fees. I don't know if it wants to, but you could
We could, yeah.
legally expand the fee if you needed to.
Mhm.
Okay, thank
It
you.
would create more of an offset.
Totally. The second question I had is, in the no scenario, you said that the elementary schools, right now, you're keeping that average at 25, and you would need to get that average to 27 enrollment in the elementary schools?
In the no scenario for grades 3 to 5
Yeah.
only, there would be an increase of that cap to 27 average.
If the average became 27, what do you think that outlier would be? Like, what's the largest class?
I can tell you, hold on. I mean, it's 27. There's like one place where, in 5th grade, we would hit 27 at 3 schools.
Okay, but not, okay, I thought that was the average, I see. So 27 would be the cap.
Yeah, so that's a cap,
Great.
not, and it's a cap on the average. It's not a cap on the class. So for example, if I'm at Hardy, this is a true example. If I'm at Hardy and I have 81 students and I set that at 3 sections,
Yes.
that's an average of 27 students per section. I wouldn't set it to 2 sections because then there'd be 41 students per section,
Okay,
right?
but you don't have classes with 30 kids in them.
Correct.
Great, thank you.
Carolyn?
Do we, and I might have gotten this answer, do we still own the land adjacent to the Crosby School where Dearborn used to be and Leslie Ellis currently is?
I have the slightest idea. Do any of you know?
Like the land?
Yes.
The land is on.
The land that Leslie Ellis is on.
The land the school's on, we don't know. But the park we own.
No, I know, but I was looking at the map earlier, that's really sad that we sold that. I went to Addison, it was a disaster, that land is a disaster. It was a disaster before I got there, it has been a disaster since. I can't believe we're considering building again on that school. On that spot, like, sell it to a developer, let them put in huge condos, they don't block much people's sun, and get rid of it and move on.
As part of the feasibility study process, you're required by the MSBA to look at all different possible locations in the
Look at
town.
that land
So
and see if we can buy it back. I sold it way under market to Dearborn.
It's not big enough.
That and the Crosby School Park would be big enough. The combination of the two of them is bigger than a number of the other schools in town, and it's bigger than other places.
But we kind of looked at all of these places when we were looking for a spot for the high school.
Well, for the high school's 4 grades, plus lots of other stuff.
So the state gives you, MSBA gives you for the high school, you're supposed to find 25 acres, which our high school is 22.5 acres. We don't have 25 acres. The middle school, we haven't started that yet. I don't know what MSBA is gonna say. I don't know what the footprint's supposed to be. It's based on enrollment and all that sort of stuff. So once we get that number, then in the feasibility study process, you have to go all around town and look at all the options. We don't know where it's gonna happen. We haven't begun this process. And just in terms of Charlie's question about the date, we're about where we were in 2016 for the high school project. So that's where we're at. We're in 2016, trying to do the Addison. And that's, so it's now it's 2026, so it's gonna be what?
My parents bought their property before we were born, thinking their sons could go to BC High on the Alewife subway. The Alewife subway is built 6 years late after my youngest brother was born. He was a sophomore in high school when Alewife opened. So like, I get the idea,
Yeah,
this is
okay.
not coming anytime soon.
Yeah, well, we'd like to make it. It's gonna take a while.
Paul, did you have a question?
Just a few things. One, in the scenario B, the general fund is level funded from 26 to 27. Why isn't there 2.5% added to it?
Because the cuts, if it does not pass, would have to be so dramatic that year, the next year, that like what some of the conversation we had also in long range planning that the town manager had assessed was we can be solvent in 27 on a level funded budget for both the town and the schools, given increases in insurance and other costs that the town is sustaining. So both, as I understand it, Mr. Feeney and I planned a level funded budget for 27, acknowledging that actually we should reduce further than that because of the impact and the size of the 28, because we're still drawing down from the override stabilization fund in 27. So we could almost make it through 27 without asking for an override. We could not quite balance that out by the time we were looking at that deficit, but it is a much smaller deficit in 27 because we're still drawing from the override fund.
Second question, circuit breaker money, how do we compare to other towns? Are we getting our fair share of that? Or...
It's a good question. I mean, from a comparison point of view, I haven't done the analysis, I'm not sure, but it is a reimbursement based on what we experience. It's not based on, we get a percent because X community, that's a peer or not a peer is getting X. It's based on the actual expenses that we're incurring, but I would just say relatively, if we're seeing significant restructured tuition rates to a highly attended school, I'm sure our claims also could be a little bit higher to a peer that also is sending kids to that same school. And then likewise, everywhere in the Commonwealth has experienced the same current year transportation increases, whether they're advantageously in a collaborative like we are, which is still a significant hit, or they went out to bid and have one vendor. Everyone across the whole state is seeing significant transportation. So I imagine all of us, regardless if they're a peer or not, are going to have higher claims this year to be recognized next year.
Now, if you asked if we were receiving our fair share of Chapter 70 allocation as a town, my answer would be no. But that's a separate conversation probably.
Just two more things quickly. So you say snow budget for the current fiscal year, you're going to balance it by taking the money from the revolving fund.
Yeah, so I'll just speak cleanly like for next year. So within that 750K, that's directly offset from the building rentals. I have the backup of that 750, whether it's utilities or it's for custodial supplies, part of a custodial contract. A part of it is we do encumber traditionally directly into that fund what would otherwise hit operating, and that is our cleaning contract or our snowplow contract. We have a fabulous DPW team, and also a partnership that facilities has with DPW to share vehicles and to be able to do as much as we can in-house with our own custodial staff and laborers in the trucks of salt and sand. We do as much as we can before we have to reach out. So some years the vendor isn't reached out to at all, or once or twice, or this year it was for multiple days for multiple big storms. That goes a little bit more to kind of a balance, but then that does give us a little ability to kind of go with the waves. But that is something that's embedded within that offset directly.
And finally, for all the rest of the budget, for FY26, are you coming in on budget? Is there any chance that you would ask for a reserve fund transfer?
Not from the town's reserve fund. We're tight in 26. If we needed to, we would dip either positive into circuit breaker or to the special ed reserve, because that's where some of our biggest unanticipated costs come from. And right now we're tracking okay.
So just talking about the reduction in utilities from the high school coming online, are you partly accounting for that because of what the solar panels are doing for you? Like, do you know what percentage of the building electricity is brought in by the solar panels? And
To be honest, I don't wanna act like an expert on this, and I'm certainly not. I've met a couple times since I've been here with, Talia Fox, our sustainability coordinator. So I've gone through her on kind of our analysis. I think one thing that's also embedded within our utility rates is I believe we have a delivery charges could change, but our unit cost or something is fixed for like the next couple of years. So kind of like circuit breaker, budget back certain for general usage. I think we can also budget a little bit more back certain. I think the superintendent kind of spoke to it that carried from 25 into 26, there was still some lingering utilities from the old high school as this one was coming online, and as this came online, it didn't have all the arrays. Now we do, and we also have it in the parking lot, and then we also this spring have 2 more coming on at 2 of our elementary schools that we own 100%. So it's not like a net credit or anything like that. So whatever we don't draw is the only thing we pay for at those schools. So from that 400K, our current budget for gas and electric is about 2.5 million. Next year with Talia, we have a projection of about 2.3. So that's about that $250,000, and then another 180,000 is offset within the building rentals account. So that's how we kind of back into the significant decrease.
So you think it's a couple $100,000 reduction in solar?
Based on our current budget for all of the investments that we've had. And I think it's again, I don't want to speak for Talia, and I apologize, I don't want to act like I know what I'm saying in regards to this. But I have solar panels on my house, I'm still trying to figure them out. But when it comes to the per unit being fixed, I know that was a significant reduction from last year and what we're experiencing this year, so we can budget a little bit more certain going forward. But also those new investments coming online, 100% will be actualized, starting in 27.
Is that rate unique to the schools, or is that the budget, like there's a rate that we negotiate for
It's
the
fixed rate from the supplier, yeah, for the whole town.
Okay, in the summer, those rates will be net metering even when the buildings are empty, yes? Like you'll be putting money back on the grid and getting established credits.
Yep, so solar panels are always on, whatever our usage is, it's only on the net. And then the credits, depending on the accounts, are applied directly to the bill. So we're only paying what we're not drawing ourselves.
Thank you.
Sophie.
Thank you for the presentation, and I apologize if I missed some of these details that I'm gonna ask about. On caps again, what about the high school? So you mentioned 3rd grade through 5th and then 6th grade. What's the largest class size in the high school?
So we have some classes right now that are around 24 at the high school. In those departments, as we welcome more kids, Dr. Janger's shuffling some staffing around in some departments to accommodate that. So like this year, we had a budgeted, Spanish is actually one of the areas where we have struggled a bit to like keep up with the demand with our staffing and also keep up with some of the rules around like co-teaching, meeting kids' IEPs. So there was a vacancy that didn't get filled this year, but that we have to fill next year. So he's gonna draw from that. He can sort of like if he gets somebody who's dual licensed, he can split a role across a couple different departments. So it's creative scheduling really, because he'll have more students at the high school without having more staff. So balancing that can be tricky because singleton classes will drive a student's schedule and cause like bubbles of larger classes. And so they did an early round of course selection this year so that he could start building the budget early so that if we found that we needed to tap, there's like a 1.0 reserve in the YES budget, we could allocate that to the high school first before it went anywhere else, knowing that that's where the enrollments are. But like how that gets parsed across departments will depend on the courses the kids pick and our ability to staff them. We're not looking at the easiest way to make a high school schedule more efficient, meaning the easiest way to make a high school schedule balance class sizes, is to have more sections of the same classes. What we heard when we interviewed families and kids in preparation for all of this was that one of the things they value the most and would hate to see go is the variety of classes we offer in the high school program of studies and the programming we've opened up as a result of the new high school. So we preserved that in both of these scenarios. This is one of those things that when we look ahead to 28 would have to change because the only way to manage the class sizes of high school is to not offer singleton classes and to have like more of this one AP class versus all of the different courses that we offer.
So I have 4 kids in school, so I'm familiar with schools, but my daughter has a friend in Belmont High School who said her freshman English class was 50 students. So do you know how we compare in our class sizes
That
compared
is shocking.
to other classes?
We don't have 50 students in a class. I don't know what class that is, but we're in ELA in particular, we're a little lower just because we've made some investments in like differentiation and like grouping the kids a little differently there. But also because of how we group them, it's easier to keep those class sizes down a little lower. Because it's the same class, all the kids into that set of sections, and so they distribute more evenly. We're really between 20 and 25 on the core classes at the high school, which is a supportive number. We've got a few classes that get bigger, PE classes can take more, for example, but we don't do that where we don't have to.
And you don't know compared to Lexington or Belmont?
I have not done a class size
Where
comparison at the high school level.
Okay,
to
that's a level. And you had the slide of the spending per pupil, but do you know the spending like elementary versus secondary? Because presumably the older kids cost more than the younger kids?
I would have to, well, I could like, we know that in that we've done some of the analysis for the budget bill. So the resources for the high school cost a lot more, like you have to have chemicals for a chem lab. You have to have more books. And so the allocations at the school level for operations and supplies and stuff like that, it takes that into some account. The staffing distributes fairly evenly just because, you have people at different levels of the step and lane grid.
Okay. And then my last question was about the special ed and IEPs. Are you noticing historically or forecasted that you just get more and more kids every year on IEPs as families become more aware, as people are more accepting, and the educators are also noticing children and are identifying students that need help? Are you noticing or have you noticed? Are you forecasting for the IEPs that way?
When I started in 2021, we had a relatively low, if you compare it to statewide, number of students on IEPs. We now track fairly tightly with the state. And I would expect that to stay that way because it shouldn't be the case that there's like disproportionately more students with disabilities in Arlington, really, like when you look at it in aggregate. We should stay relatively level close to that state line. We are also, we didn't touch intervention in either of these because when you notice an issue and you intervene early, you can avoid the IEP. And so we're hoping some of those measures allow us to keep students in a more inclusive environment, whether or not they need an IEP or disability, and that over time that should keep us relatively level if we can maintain the interventionists. You will see an increase in IEPs if you lose some of that early intervention structure.
Thank you.
Dean.
So I'm gonna switch topics and go back to the capital projects for a minute. It's the high school building project kind of interesting. And it's not really in anyone's budget. It's a dedicated project. It's kind of in the capital plan, but it's mostly a school department project, right? I just said to Sophie, I said, one of the things I find to be interesting with the high school building project is it's the first time a complicated $300 million project just faded to the background in everybody's memory. So the capital planning committee came in and said the project's $500,000 under budget. That, yes, what you guys are at about that sounds about right. So it's not really a question, more of a comment. I just want to say publicly, it's really incredible what happened there in a very positive way, right? The town essentially tore a building down in chunks, knowing that the back of the site was toxic, rebuilt it in place, and it came in on time and on budget.
And at one point we had to spend an extra $1 million because we had planned to do remote school after school came back. We couldn't do remote school. So we had to push phasing at one point out months, and it moved the project timeline back and pay all the staff to do it because we hadn't accounted for the timing of a phase shift, and we didn't have enough room in the school for all of the kids to start school unless we moved the project timeline back, and it still came in under budget. That part really amazed me.
No, look, I think I think it went so well that everybody just stopped thinking about it, right? Which is amazing because as history has shown, in 2010 with, Newton North, it can cost a mayor their job, right? And think, oh, we don't live in Lexington, because that's costly, right? I'd like 300 million or 600 million.
One point being is that we locked in the guaranteed maximum
I know
price
you did.
in December of 2019.
Well,
Just the we saw very clearly what was happening.
No. Here's the thing, I'm gonna tell you.
We made some phone
Okay.
calls and boom.
I get the guarantee and all that. You gotta do, there's a lot of work that goes into this, right? So I'll tell everybody here kind of a funny aside, right? So, my youngest son, one of Jeff's sons, the same age, they played baseball together for a bunch of years. I think Jeff and I coached the fall team together once, right? So my son's playing football in the fall and he comes home and, we're opening the fields up in phases. And this is sort of the steady, thankless work, right? And I said, well, how's football? I said, great, Jack's dad is walking the fields in the dark and creating punch lists and making sure the project doesn't fall apart. He's like, but we had a lovely conversation. It was great. I said, okay, well, that sounds good. But that's just and I laugh, right? But that's the thankless work of a large 5-year project, right? We can take guarantee, you can be humble, fine. But as a group, you guys all stuck to this really well, and nothing would have destroyed, future, I think we talked about this 6 years ago, nothing would have destroyed future debt exclusion projects quite like this going sideways. And it's amazing because if you think about it, not only did it not come in on time, off budget, and all that, but as we shift to the future, we start talking about an audit. We can talk about the need for an audit. We talk about the need not for an audit, right? But nobody has said so far we can't do another one of those capital projects because of how poorly it went, right? And and I think it should be noted as we're closing it out that you guys all stuck to it for 6 long years. It was a hard lift. It seemed very complicated.
Thank you.
And you deserve all the praise you get for it, which is apparently nothing.
What happens? It goes on. Thank you, Dean. That's very nice of you to say.
As long as we're on that theme, you came in $500,000 under budget despite the hit to the contingency and the IT kerfuffle. So it's really more than $500,000 if you think about it, because you didn't get to spend that $480,000 on the school. We just pulled it out of contingency to pay for this silly event.
Yeah, there was a lot of discussion about the contingency.
You couldn't think of $500,000 worth of stuff we needed to make the budget?
Well, there was a lot, so the building committee takes votes and there's different people with different perspectives, and so you have to balance all the views, and so that's where we ended up.
Well, I'm very proud of you that you didn't think of $500,000.
Yeah, and don't forget we haven't, not everything's done yet, so it might be.
The punch list isn't good.
So,
Yeah, you didn't read it yet.
Carolyn.
Just in support of Dean's comments there, a word of caution. When the Addison was last renovated, it came in at twice the budget and 5 years late.
Yeah.
And it almost killed the overrides, or the debt exclusions for the elementary schools improvements. So having done that, is pretty amazing.
Other questions? No more questions? All right, well, thank you all.
Thank
Your
you.
presentation has been fabulous. It's been both detailed and informative, but right to the point as well. And I appreciate your getting the materials to us when you did. That was very helpful. And spending the time with us tonight and for the good job that you have been doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the time you're spending listening to us.
Oh, sure.
All right, everyone. Michael?
Just want to check, make sure, not a special town meeting in the fall.
Michael? All right, everyone.
Yeah.
Let's discuss the school budget. Anyone have a motion?
I move we approve the school budget.
Second. All right, discussion. No discussion?
Just
All
a
right, we are
clarification,
already-
we're approving the scenario A.
That's what I understand. Any further questions or discussion? All right, all.
Would you restate that? We're approving specifically one version of the school budget? Of the two presented tonight?
Correct.
Plan A, which is 107,775,899.
Do we have to reconvene to approve Plan B if the vote goes the other way?
Yeah.
Yes. and we're
It's
going to
selected
do it
for all
anyway.
of the budgets.
Anything further? All right, all in favor of approving the school budget, raise your hand. $19. Opposed? 1. Any abstentions? 0. 19-1-0. All right, so the school budget has been approved.
The full committee.
Yeah, make it easy. All right, so capital. Charlie.
I'd like to make a motion that we reconsider the capital budget.
I want to point out that since Charlie was on the losing side, he can't move to reconsider, but I will entertain a motion from somebody on the winning side.
Oh, I'll
So moved.
So moved.
And, since-
Second.
All right, so we would have to vote to reconsider and then take another vote on the budget. So Charlie, tell us why you think we should reconsider, and the discussion will be just whether we should reconsider. And then, if necessary, we'll go to the next level.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, I sent an email out with a lot of detail in it. And I had reviewed a fair amount of that information with Chris Moore last week, probably I think it was Thursday, Friday. And also had some email communications with Josh over the weekend as it developed. Last week, I had a lot of that information, but it wasn't very well organized. So, in my mind, this is not a discussion about whether natural gas is better than heat pumps or heat pumps are better than natural gas. Turns out, if you read through the document, they come out more or less the same. Within under the base scenario, probably within 3% of each other on a long-term basis. And if there's some shifts in the cost of the utilities, the natural gas could come out maybe 7 or 8% lower, but there's a lot of assumptions there. The basic issue is that if you look in the capital budget, there's a number of other schools mentioned that have to have their rooftop units replaced. And those rooftop units, I'm just going to do this from memory, they're in the $300,000 to $500,000, $600,000 range per unit, depending upon the size of the school. The proposal is to spend $375,000 for a project to analyze and justify a project that's going to cost, according to the Capital Budget Committee, or Capital Planning Committee, $4.5 billion. So there's a huge disconnect, in my mind, between the cost of the Hardy rooftop units and what we're contemplating spending on the other school buildings. So I went through, I got some very interesting Gemini analysis, and yes, indeed, heat pump units are more expensive than natural gas units, but it's generally on a 20-ton basis, you know, the natural gas unit might be $30,000 and the heat pump might be $50,000. And the school has 8 of them. And you can make some different models, which I did, and sometimes I came up with 8, sometimes I come up with 10 units, but basically, 10 times, say, $40,000 is $400,000. It's not $4.5 million. Rebecca sent out a report today, which I hadn't seen, but it was an analysis, or let's say a study by the MSBA on converting school buildings into with heat pumps to make them more environmentally acceptable. And they looked at 18 schools. I'm just going to say this very briefly. They looked into a lot of different details and based on the age of the schools, the size of the schools, what their current heating systems were, et cetera. And most of the schools were fairly old, just like the Hardy. The Hardy was built in 1926. And the average cost of electrifying those schools was between $5 and $8 million, depending upon what assumptions you were going to choose from the report. So my position is we're asking the voters for a $14 or $15 million override. As you can see, we have an Addison school or a middle school project coming up of great import. It strikes me that it's totally unreasonable to consider spending $4.5 or $5 million. I mean, this is today. We all know when you get into doing these things, the price always goes up. It never goes down. So spending that money when we could be spending the same price as on the other schools that's in the capital budget, replacing those units, say at $30,000 or $50,000 a piece, so that the aggregate cost is in the $500,000 range as opposed to $5 million, is the way we should be going. It's the direction that we should be giving the town. We're a finance committee, and we should be emphasizing that responsible spending is the direction we should be going in. And this, I don't see this $5 million or $4.5 million proposal as responsible spending, considering all the other things that we have to consider paying for in this town. So, you know, I've done some work on this. If somebody wants to do more work on it, I would encourage it. I'd be happy. Oh, and I wanted to make one other comment. You know, on this project, if you took the heat pump operating cost and reduced it to 0, the 20-year operating cost would still be something like $5 or $6 million versus maybe $1 million for a natural gas alternative using the current technology. Even if you took the total operating cost out, forget whether electricity costs more than gas or less than gas or more than gas or whatever. So I just think this is the wrong thing to do. It's the wrong time to do it. If we spend that $375,000, which should be used elsewhere, then we're just sort of blessing the idea of going forward with a $5 million project. And it's the wrong time. So I'm recommending that we reconsider this issue, that we act like a finance committee. We tell the capital planning committee, you've done great work. Darryl, you have done great work, let me tell you. But it's just not the time to be spending $5 million on that project. Because, you know, I have seen in the past in this town, the idea that we want to electrify all the buildings in the town. Well, at $5 or $10 million a piece, that's a huge capital cost. And it's not something that we can rationally think about given our limited tax base and the fact that, you know, we don't have a big commercial tax base. So I ask that you consider reconsider.
All right, so what we have before us is not to rebut Charlie.
I'm sorry?
It's not to rebut what you just said. Our first vote is whether to reconsider.
Yeah, I said, to consider reconsidering.
So does anyone have
A little
anything,
onomatopoeia there.
does anyone have anything to the issue of whether we should, not whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, how much money we should spend here or there, but whether we should reconsider? Does anyone have anything to say to in the contrary? Annie?
So my recollection from the warrant is that the Hardy feasibility and the Addison feasibility are separate articles. Have we voted those articles?
No, we have not.
So would it be more appropriate to have the discussion that Charlie wants to have, that he wants to reopen the capital budget for when we vote that article?
Can you speak a little louder?
Yeah.
There's a separate article for the Hardy feasibility and the Addison feasibility. We haven't voted those articles yet. We voted on the general capital budget, which doesn't include those numbers, I believe.
No,
They're separate articles.
It
does?
if they're on here.
So did we
Capital
include both of those articles?
It's on the capital budget.
So we included both of those articles when we voted? Like, we
Yeah.
voted on 3 articles at once? Because that was not clear to me.
We voted on capital plan that was presented,
Okay,
and in that plan is the recommendations for the amounts, correct?
okay, got it. All right, clear then.
Alright, anyone have anything else to say for or against our reconsidering the capital budget? Alan?
I guess I'd like to get an idea what, if we reconsider what we'd be doing, calling capital planning in, calling facilities in, what additional information would we need to bring in to make a different decision?
We would reopen the entire capital plan. And
We don't want to reopen and just vote again, we want to get some additional information.
we could. Alfonso?
Oh, I was gonna ask in the question whether there's gonna be money in Article 66 and 67 for the feasibility studies or not. Do you know?
No, all I know is that they're in the capital plan that we voted on last
Well, the
week.
capital budget.
Yes.
So do you know if additional money is gonna be in these 2 articles?
No, I didn't actually know until now that
Okay.
2 articles were in there.
I mean, we've already approved the capital plan. There's this one specific issue that Charlie has raised. I think he's provided enough information, raised enough issues, that we should reopen it and settle that issue. And then we could just vote it again. I don't see a problem in that.
Alright, again, not the merits, just whether we're gonna reopen. Rebecca, then Carolyn. I'm sorry, Daryl, then Rebecca, then Carolyn.
I just wanted to ask, I'm assuming we wouldn't be opening the entire capital plan. We would be opening that one specific project, or reconsidering that one specific project.
In effect, we would be, but then we could decide what the terms of the discussion would be after we get to it.
We are deciding whether to reconsider our vote on the capital plan, period.
So now I guess is whether we.
One at a time, Josh. Rebecca?
Thank you. So just speaking to whether we should reconsider, to my mind, I don't think that we do have new information because I think that the 4.5 or 4 something million for the eventual project on the Hardy, I feel like that was clear in the capital budget, that was the down the line, that was going to be the cost of this. And that the feasibility study, the amount that they're proposing hasn't changed. I think that information was within the capital budget, and I think that the amount that they're saying that it could cost, the 4 point whatever million, is consistent. It's not somehow different from what one would expect that sort of project to cost. So on the grounds that I don't think we have new information, I would not vote to reconsider.
Carolyn?
So this may or may not qualify. If it doesn't qualify for this discussion, just let me know. So I have concerns about 2 other things. One is if we're looking at where we're gonna put a school and the amount of money they're spending on tennis courts at a in an area that may eventually be a school is not a good use of funds until that study is done. And two, what was the other thing? There was something else I was really concerned about. So I think.
So you wanna reopen, for other grounds, to reopen other aspects. Yeah. Sophie?
I would argue that there is some new information, given that I don't think many of us were clear whether or not there is money in these other warrant articles, and I think that's an important piece of information to have. But I did have a question, if we were to reconsider it, how does it work? Because doesn't the capital plan spend the 5%, the money would have to go, they would spend it on something else, right? So would they come back with a plan of what's the consequence if we don't like these two line items?
Well, we wouldn't necessarily have to spend it.
Okay.
We just can't go over the 5%,
Okay.
go under. And B, there's plenty of demand for it. I assume we would have to come back at least with,
But there'd have to be some
Those
proposal to
definitely.
either not spend it or reallocate it, if we reconsider. Or if we vote to reconsider and then, okay. Just to understand.
Josh, did you have something?
Just a clarification that I suppose you could take your chance at town meeting also, right? Town meeting, we might not approve it, but town meeting might, no?
I'll defer to the FinCom chair and the capital chair. I think that would be awkward at best.
Okay.
But town meeting can change.
Yeah.
And then I guess I'm supportive of Charlie's notion to reconsider, and that he's put some effort to look at the information, and I think it's worth it for us to get feedback, more feedback than what we have. Talia Fox, who's one of the main people, is just going out on parental leave for X amount of time, so maybe difficult to get information from her. And in terms of, I think we just took one vote on the capital plan, so we have to reconsider the whole vote, I guess, procedurally. But sort of like the commitment to overrides, we might all kind of agree, okay, we're gonna do that, but we're gonna not pay attention to the rest of the capital plan, we're only gonna discuss this particular issue. There's a gentleman's concept of reconsideration.
Or gentlewoman's. John, and then Charlie.
Shorty, I have a question and a comment. So the question is, when you say the money was in the budget, that's just for I just want to confirm, that's just for the study, right? That's just for the analysis.
Yeah.
Okay, so not the big money.
Yeah.
And then the comment is, I think Charlie's done a great job of identifying an issue that kind of could potentially move the needle on our finances going forward. I think the challenge that this committee faces a lot is that we identify issues, but they're kind of small, and are they gonna make a big difference in the long run? I think this definitely could make a big difference in the long run, so I'm definitely gonna vote to revisit the capital plan. Thank you, Charlie.
Charlie?
So, Madam Chair, thank you. If the committee were to reconsider, I would simply make a motion with respect to that one item and not address anything else in the capital budget.
So you're saying if and when we reconsider, you'll have a motion
Just
to delete that.
One item is for.
But as Carolyn points out, she may have other amendments.
Yeah, there's some others who might as well. They just haven't spoken up.
All right, anyone want to speak up, Peggy, on the issue of whether to reconsider?
I'm trying to understand, the budget has the $375K for the feasibility study, but then we have a warrant article to vote on that same feasibility study. And if the town votes it down, what happens to that money in the budget?
It isn't spent. All right, I think we're ready to take a vote on whether to reconsider. All right, all those in favor of wanting to reconsider the capital budget, raise your hand. For, against, raise your hands. 5, Any abstentions? Abstention, and the motion to reconsider passes with 75% of the vote, 2/3 vote, which is what it needed to be passed. So we will reconsider the capital budget, not tonight. The town manager is coming in on Wednesday. There are a lot of things we want to talk to him about Wednesday night, and depending on what time we have left, we still have some very big important budgets to do, so we really have to hit the ground running, including DPW, huge, IT, critical, and a couple of other budgets down.
I'm looking at the Article 66 and 67, and they have wording in it that MSBA requires you to do. And they were submitted by the town manager, school committee, and capital budget committee. So maybe when the manager comes in, the issue could be explained and say, okay, we want you to talk about this issue too. See what he has to say.
So all of the budgets we have left, people are ready to present when they're, except for insurance, which will be next Monday. And water sewer.
And water sewer. We're meeting Thursday.
So as soon as we finish with the manager, we gotta just start working through what we have left. We have next week, on Monday, on Wednesday, we'll probably need it to finish some things up. Then the override, and we will be meeting the Monday after the override, either as a crying fest before we have to redo everything, or it might be an opportunity for us to just talk about greater things like how we should deal with overrides in the future, what our role is, give us some space to have that conversation without the gun to our heads. Yeah.
So can I ask a very selfish question? I'm heading for warm weather Wednesday through the next Tuesday. Do you anticipate the capital reconsideration coming up before next Wednesday?
Good.
Okay.
We'll have to talk.
You'll just have to come back.
No. I care, but not that much.
What's the date you're going away?
Wednesday.
This coming Wednesday?
Yeah, I'm gonna be, I can't even call in to be in here.
And you'll be gone next week,
Monday, I could call in, obviously I can't vote, but I could
but
call
you'll
in.
be here a week from
Wednesday,
Wednesday.
yeah,
Alright.
the 26th.
Alright, maybe we'll,
here.
I can figure it out. Alright, is there a motion to adjourn?
So,
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.